Hello. So a few days ago somebody emailed me and asked if I might demonstrate landing one of the big jets at a high altitude airport just to see what's involved in doing so. So today we're going to take the PMDG 737-900, the Microsoft Flight Simulator, and we're going to fly it from Chacalluta, which is on the north edge of Chile, and we're going to fly northeast over to Alto, near La Paz in Bolivia, which is one of the highest altitude airports in the world. So it's going to present some issues because obviously flying a big heavy jet, and again a bigger heavier jet like the 737-900, which is like the stretch version, the wings are the same size as the smaller 737s, the body's larger, so it's got more loading on the wings, so thinner air at high altitude is going to present problems. So it's going to be an interesting one. So this is as much me trying this out as it is you seeing it happen. So we're going to go and jump inside the aeroplane and get it up and running first, and then we'll program the route in and we'll get on our way. And we'll have a little talk along the way about what we're doing. Okay, so Control 6 takes us overhead in the 737. We go and turn the battery on and close or cage the switch for the battery. And I'm just getting my checklist ready so I can work through it with you. I will put a link to the checklist in the notes of the video. Okay, so Control 3 takes us down to the tablet, go to the FS Actions menu, Ground Services, and Request Ground Power. So that will connect ground power to the aircraft. When it says release, the ground power has been connected. So if we have a look outside, you can see the cart here now generating power, and it's connecting. Give it a few seconds, and it now says release. Okay, so we can go back overhead and we can transfer over to ground power. So rather than just using the batteries now, we're actually using ground power, and more things will come on around the aircraft. Okay, so we go further overhead now, and we go and align the inertial navigation system. So we set the left system to nav, and it will say align. We set the right system to nav, and it will say align. And then we can change the knob above to HDG STS, and it will tell us that 8 minutes to go until the system aligns, which is fine because we've got other things to be doing in the meantime. So we'll come back down, lower in the aircraft, we'll go and turn the emergency lights to armed and cage the switch. We'll go and turn on the window heats and the probe heats. And then we're going to go and program our flight plan. So Control and 3 takes us back down to the FMC. To get back to the front page, you press the menu button, then the FMC button, and then it wants the IRS position, so position initialization. We go next page, pick up the GPS position of the aircraft into the scratch pad, previous page, drop it into the set IRS, which makes that disappear. And now we want to put in our reference airport. So if we have a quick look on Navigraph at the same route we saw in Little Nav Map, we're taking off from Chacalluta. The ICAO code is SCAR. So we key in SCAR into the scratch pad, drop it into the reference airport field, and then go to the route page. It's still in the scratch pad, so we can drop that into the origin. And now we can put in the destination airfield, which is El Alto, which is SLLP. SLLP. Drop that into destination. We can put in the runway we're leaving Chacalluta on, which is runway 20. And then go and set up the departure from how do you pronounce it again? Chacalluta. So runway 20, we're going to be doing the Vega 2 standard instrument departure, and then we'll go back to the route page and activate and execute that route. While we're here, we'll go and program our approach into El Alto. So we're going to be using localizer Z onto runway 10. We're also going to be using the Devu 1A standard terminal arrival route. So we'll execute that change and then go to the route page and performance initialization, and we can pre-calculate the zero fuel weight, one of the nice time savers this aircraft has. We're going to be flying at a cruise of 25,000 feet, so flight level 250. We'll just put 1,000 pounds of reserve fuel and a cost index of 100. So I'm pulling these numbers out of thin air. If you had an operational flight plan, you'd obviously be filling it in accurately. So N1 limit, we can leave all that alone. We don't want to derate. We're going to need all the power we can get. Takeoff, we're going to put flaps 5 degrees and transfer over the V-speeds. So rotate at 152 knots. We can calculate the centre of gravity, and that will give us a trim of 5.26. So if we scroll down here, we can go and move the trim. So we're watching the needle slowly moving there to get it to 5.26. Slowly making its way along. That's probably about right. It's not an exact science setting the takeoff refs. And do we need to put the winds in? I don't think we do. There's very, very light wind at the departure airfield. Okay, so we're pretty much done with that. So we need to go into the legs page and solve any discontinuities. So we're going to close up this one here, go to the next page, close up this one here, and execute the change. So let's just have a quick flick through. We're looking good. All the discontinuities have been resolved. Okay, so now we go to the master control panel for the autopilot. We're going to set the runway heading for takeoff. So let's go and open up the airport map of the departure airfield, and we can see we're going to be taking off runway 20. So we want 206 on the heading. Remember, we're going to climb straight out to 25,000 feet, so we'll go and set 25,000 as our target altitude. We'll go and set, say, 220 knots for the initial speed for the auto throttle. We'll turn the flight directors on, and we can arm the auto throttle already, and we can select lateral navigation. I'm not sure. Oh, we can select level change already. Okay, so the moment we do turn on the autopilot, everything should hopefully come to life correctly. That buzz you heard then was just my controls having a bit of a turn. It sometimes happens on my computer for some reason that's known only to the manufacturers of the computer. So we're just going to turn the brightness down a bit there on the standby attitude indicator. Okay. So we have got all of that ready, so we'll go and calibrate the altimeters as well. So I just press B to shortcut doing that. So overhead, control 6, seatbelts go to on, or auto even. Yaw damper can go to on. Cabin pressure we set to our cruise altitude. So that was 25,000 feet, and our landing altitude is going to be a serious one, isn't it? So it's 13,300 feet. So we're pushing it through. It's not very often you push your landing altitude out this far, is it? So we then go and turn aft fuel pump number 1 on, and we turn on the APU and flick the start switch. Bear with me a moment. Okay, apologies for that. Somebody came to the door. It's always the way, isn't it? You work all morning to try and clear yourself time to do a recording, and then the moment you start recording, all of the interruptions start happening. Okay, so how far have we got? We've turned on the APU, so we can see it's dropped down to 4. So we can transfer over power to the APU. So we're no longer using ground power, so we can press Control 3, we can go back to the menu page, back to FS Actions, back to Ground Services, and we can release the ground power from the aircraft. We can, while we're waiting for that, we can hold the tow brakes on and then pull on the parking brake, because we're about to remove the chocks. So we'll remove the chocks, and removing the chocks is the trigger for the door to close. So you can see the door closing there and the stairs to be pulled away from the aircraft. So we'll let all that get on with happening. And if we press Control 6, did we bus transfer over? We did, didn't we? Yeah. See, this is the trouble. I've been distracted now, and it causes mayhem with working through the flow of doing things if you get stopped in the middle of doing it. Okay. So, fuel pumps all go to on now. APU bleed can go to on, and we are ready to push back. We don't need to push back. If we have a look outside, we're just going to turn the aircraft around this corner. There's nothing else around us. We're purposely on the edge of this parking area so we don't have to push back. So we're going to proceed with engine start. So we move the engine start system for the right engine, or engine number 2, to GRD. We put the ignition on the right ignition system, and you can see the N2 number is coming up. I'm just going to change the speakers so I'm hearing the aeroplane the same as you are. So as soon as it comes to 20%, we can advance the start lever for engine number 2. And we have fuel flow, we have exhaust gas temperature raising, we have the turbofan starting to spin, which is great. You will notice the start switch will go back to off all on its own. So give it a few moments. Okay, engine number 1, we move to GRD. We'll use the left ignition system on engine number 1. So there's 2 systems, you can just alternate them, it's for wear and tear purposes really. So N2, the gas turbine's coming up to speed. When it gets to 20%, we will advance the start lever for engine number 1. And exhaust gas temperature raises, fuel flow increases, and the turbofan starts to spin up. So if we have a look outside, you can see this one's coming up to speed, this one's already going quite some rate of knots. So we're just waiting now for the switch to center itself. If you keep an eye on that switch, when it goes click, there it goes. We can transfer over to the engines now for power instead of the APU, which means we can then remove the APU bleed and turn off the APU. Okay, I'm just scrolling down through my checklist, see how far we've got. Okay, so it's hydraulic pumps next. So hydraulic pumps go to on. The packs can come on, so they go to auto. The taxi light can come on. And we're getting ready to taxi essentially, so we're going to move the flaps to takeoff position, which is 5 degrees. I've already done that, and you can monitor that on the little meter here, which shows you the flap position. It takes them a while to transit, as it calls it. And then we're going to taxi out to the runway. So we have 5 degrees on flaps, so we have to hold the toe brakes on, and that releases the parking brake automatically. We can get rid of the master caution that came on earlier. If we zoom out a little bit on this, we should see we've got the route showing on there now. Okay, so ease the throttles forwards, and we're rolling. So left turn. Just make our way out to the holding position for the runway. So yeah, this is going to be an interesting one. Full disclosure, I tried to do this flight last night, and I had all sorts of warnings go off in the cockpit, and I've been doing a bit of research, and it's debatable whether there's a solution for it, so it's going to be interesting to see what happens. We won't see anything really happen until we get to the final turning point for our approach into El Alto. So we'll see how we get on. Watching the aeroplane's coming in very late, isn't he? It's going to run out of runway. Yeah, an aborted approach. Okay, let's get back on the centre line of the taxiway at least. You can see the windsocks hanging down. There's hardly a breath of wind here today. It's looking good. Okay, so let's just have a check around. When we get to the holding point, we're obviously going to go and turn the lights on, turn the traffic collision avoidance system on. We're pretty much good to go. Go back to the legs page. On the other side we'll go to FMC and the progress page. So we'll roll round towards the runway. Just dabbing the brakes to slow down a little bit. Okay, so sit here on the toe brakes for a second. So the position strobe lights can go to strobing now. The landing lights can go to on. TCAS can go to TARA, and we can switch the mode here to display traffic on our screen. And we'll line up. So from experience with the 737-900, we'll be looking for about 12 degrees of pitch off the runway. Okay, lined up. Shall we do this? Just going to zoom out slightly. So I'm controlling the throttles manually, so we're just going to take them out to just under 100%. So we're waiting now for the rotate speed to come through on the ribbon. Then we rotate at no more than 3 degrees a second. And we are airborne.
Positive rate of climb.
So gear comes up. Remember I said we go for about 12 degrees. We're just about holding speed at a 12 degree-ish climb. Just above that, actually, look, we're about 15. So we just trim out for that. Let the aeroplane continue climbing, maintain speed till we're a few thousand feet off the ground. Just drop that nose a little bit steep. Okay. Autopilot on, LNAV is on, level change is on. We're climbing out to 2,500 feet. It's going for 220 knots, so it's just to dip the nose a little bit. we'll tell it to go out to 250 knots now. And we don't have much left to do during the climb out. I'm just going to turn the gear switch to off. Taxi light can come off. Landing lights will come off a bit later. It's getting quite dark outside actually, it's quite dull, so we're going to see what we can do about brightening up some of these panels around the aeroplane. Make sure we can see what we're doing. So let's turn the... all this is doing is making the words a bit brighter around the various instruments. Okay, we have some cloud. There's the flaps. So we have a 250 limit until we get to 10,000 feet above sea level. 250 knot limit, I should say. We came up just to underneath that limit as well. That was the flap limit as well on the 5 degrees of flaps. Let's have a look outside. Bit of cloud on the coast, which is a shame because there's some really impressive hills here. Obviously we're not going to see. Okay, we're just coming up to the turn. The transition altitude here is 10,000 feet at the departure airport. So we can see that on the diagram. There we go, transition altitude 10,000 feet. So you can see as us, we're just coming up to the turn, and yeah, the flight director's kicked in. It's pushing us around the corner. Everything's looking good. It's coming up to 8,000 feet. Oh, maybe we can see those hills. Yes, we can. Oh, look at that. Very cool. So there's a very, very dramatic coastline along here. Can't quite see it because of the cloud cover. What if we go over the other side, if we can look down far enough to see it? Not quite. It's always the way, isn't it? The aeroplane's in our way of seeing anything. Okay, so you can see we're just coming round to our course, so let's go and zoom out on that slightly. Just come through 10,000 feet, so we're going to switch over to standard barometric pressure. We're also going to turn off the, oops, wrong switch, turn off the landing lights. And there isn't really a lot to do now until we get to the other end. So I'm just going to increase speed now. Now we're above 10,000 feet, we can accelerate, so we'll go for 320 knots. It's a nice looking aeroplane, isn't it? And this part of the world is very dramatic looking to fly over. Okay. So just see we're accelerating out to 320 knots, which is 20 knots short of the speed restriction for the airframe. So I'm going to pause recording at this point, and I will unpause when we get closer to descent. So we've got a little way to go, as you'll imagine. So if we zoom out, we're just turning this corner, we've got to go all the way across here. I will come back online just before the Denver waypoint when we're looking at the standard terminal arrival route into El Alto. Okay, so I will see you in a few minutes. Okay, you're back with me. So you will probably have noticed, if you're more eagle-eyed amongst you, there was an FMC warning up, and it was warning me that it couldn't get to the altitude. That was because on a normal flight path, without doing a flight level change, it was thinking it wasn't going to get to flight level 250 in time, but as you can see we are at flight level 250, it's absolutely fine. So we cleared the warning and have continued on. So just before we begin our descent, which will start at Denver, we're going to go and have a little look overhead at the cabin pressurization system, and you will notice this needle is very, very low. Okay, so when we descend down in and we start opening the aircraft up, there is a chance we could hear some alarms. So if you probably didn't notice this, but when you're on the ground, that needle will be right the other side of this gauge. So if you need to intervene, if it's too low when you're near the ground, so you may well get, let's see if we can find it in the cockpit, there's a warning here for cabin altitude. Okay, it's meaning the cabin pressurization system isn't happy with the pressurization outside, which we may get at a high altitude airport. So what you can do, if it starts going off, is you can actually switch this system to manual, and then if we open and hold this open, you can see the needle climbing, and then when you let go, it will stay there. If you switch it back to auto, it will come back. Here we go, we've triggered it, look. So we've got a cabin altitude warning going on. So if we come back over, we can cut off the altitude horn. Yeah, and you can see, look, it's dropped down too low, but is it slowly climbing back up? It's difficult to see. So I'm going to go back to manual and give it some pressure. So I'm going to put some pressure back into the cabin basically. Obviously, if you do go to manual, there are charts you can follow to set the appropriate setting for the altitude. Okay, so we'll leave it there on manual for the moment. And we're going to start worrying about descending when we get to Denver. But that's interesting, yeah, so the cabin altitude alarm has gone off and you can't clear it once it's gone off. So I don't particularly want to go and press the trip reset button because that's not what it's for. Yeah, we have got time, we've got a few seconds, so let's put this back to auto. See if it just drops straight off the end of the gauge again. Yeah, it does look. Interesting. So it's just something to be aware of. So I'm going to charge it back up on manual. Okay, so let's go and have a look at the approach route, also the arrival route. We have some altitude restrictions in place, so we have to be above 18,000 because there are some hills in the way on the arrival route, and then the most important one is above 17,000 for UCTAT. So we'll come down for 17,500 and we'll use vertical speed. So you can see UCTAT is out ahead of us over there. So if we do a flight level change, let's see how quickly that thinks it can do it. So the green banana will sweep in. It's just pulling the throttles back to allow the descent to happen without overspeeding. Remember, we're going to need to slow down as well because we need to get to 180 knots by the time we get to UCTAT. So that while this might look like we're going to do it easily, it may not be that easy once we say that we want to slow down as well. So if we told this immediately we want to come to 250 knots, which will get us 240, look what happens to the banana. It's going miles out. So we'll say 250 for the moment. Obviously we can use spoilers to expedite all of this. But we'll just let the aircraft drift back. So we're 40 miles out from Uktat at the moment, so we can zoom in on the display and it should scroll into view very soon. Obviously the speed is still coming off. So let's go and use the spoilers just to show the effect they're going to have. Oh, the sim has frozen by the look of it. Hopefully it will unfreeze itself in a second. There we go. Again, as I mentioned earlier, that I have some sort of control strangeness with the simulator, but it doesn't usually harm it. Okay, so back off the spoilers, and we should find that we can descend. Here comes the green banana back in. So we will go for 18. We'll go for 18,200 feet. Remember, we've got to lose another quite considerable amount of airspeed yet, so we'll wait till we're a bit closer and then we'll pull the indicated airspeed target back. While we're en route, just descending along towards Uktat, let's go and have a look at the information for the destination. We want to see, open the airport and look at the weather. We want to get the barometric pressure, so 1040 hectopascals. So we'll go and put the meter into hectopascals before we get there. So remember that 1040 we're going to need to change the barometric pressure to when. It's an interesting one, isn't it? Because what's the transition altitude going to be? Is it on this chart? Maybe it's on the approach chart. 18,000 feet. So when we come through 18,000 feet, we change the barometric pressure to 1040. So we obviously got the master caution came on with the cabin altitude, that's fine. Cleared it. So, do we have a speed restriction at LP904? No, we don't. So it's only once we get to Uktat that we have the speed restriction in place. So let's go and, while we're descending still, let's go and sort out the ILS. So 110.3 and 100 degrees. So let's go and set 100 degrees on the course. 100. On nav 100 on nav 2 and 110.3 on the radios. Transfer that over. 110.3. Transferred over. Okay, so ILS is ready. So you can see the airport's about 35 miles out now. Just coming down, we're within 1,000 feet of our target altitude. That's what that beep was. And let's go for 200 knots to begin with. We are going to probably need flaps to maintain 180 knots in this thin air. So these are the things you start to need to think about for a very high altitude airfield. So speed is coming off down to 200. About 10 miles out from Uktat now. Just about to pass through 904 where we have to stay above 180, which we are doing. So we can carry on down to the reason for these altitude restrictions were these hills. So if we sit up and look sideways, can we see? No, can't quite see it yet. When we turn the corner towards the airfield, you'll see it. It's somewhere over there. Okay, so we're looking good. We're going to get down to the target altitude, and we need to be at 180 knots though. So I'm going to go for the first stage of flaps and take us down to 180 knots. See, now look, this is what I was hoping would happen. We can't do it in the present configuration. It doesn't like it, look, it's going to be too slow. So we're going to go for another stage of flaps. So by the time the flaps have finished travelling, the warning should go away. Also, we probably need the gear down with this level of flaps. We may get a warning about it. So we're down beyond 18,000 feet now, so we need to go to correct our hectopascal reading for the barometric pressure to 1040. And you can see now the airplane's settled down, it's quite happy going to 180 knots with the flaps in position. So they're at 10 degrees. And it's happy with it. If you get that flashing A on the target airspeed, on the auto throttle, it basically means it can't do it in the current configuration. Okay, so when we make the turn, we should see the airfield in the distance, and we should hopefully pick up the glide slope fairly quickly. So you can see we're just coming in towards the approach. So it's managing speed and altitude now. So let's go down to, well, now we've passed through that waypoint, we'll start dropping speed. And more flaps, and you can see there's the airfield directly in front of us. So we're getting a warning. Is it the same one? No, it's not. Oh, it's telling us the gear isn't down. I've used the wrong lever. I keep forgetting I've got an Airbus, so that's warning us the configuration of the aircraft. It will stop doing it as soon as the gear has travelled. So if you go beyond 10 degrees of flap and you haven't got the gear down, you get a warning. So that's another thing to take into account for these high altitude departures, arrivals where you're coming in with a lot of flap a lot earlier than you normally would. So let's go for full flaps now, and you can see we need to drop to another few knots. So obviously we can get rid of that speed. Now we've gone above the glide slope, so I'm going to come off the autopilot and come off the get us back onto the glide slope. So this is one of the things of when you're working on your own and you're trying to explain things, you can sometimes get a little bit behind the aeroplane. So we're just going to get ourselves back on track. So manual throttle, manual control now. We're full flaps, we've got the gear down. We need to get the landing lights on. So you just need to be more aware, really, I guess. You'll also notice how narrow the margins are on the airspeed between overspeeding and and stalling. So at high altitude, it becomes an issue. So we're pretty much on the glide slope. Just lifting the nose to maintain it. We're going to have to increase thrust. But look how narrow those margins are. Yeah. We've got about a 10 knot window to get it in. It's opening up gently, look, there's a 20 knot window now. So you really do need to be quite accurate. So just while we're coming in, let's have a little look at that needle. We can't really see it from here, can we? If we do get another warning from it, obviously this is something the co-pilot would be doing while the pilot's doing this. So the workload does go up for a high altitude approach. Because we're right on the limit of the aeroplane's performance basically at full flaps. Especially with I'm making it worse through having an aircraft like the 737-900, which is not really suited to this situation it finds itself in, so we've gone a little bit low. So I've noticed this before in the simulator. I think this ILS is coming in high, so I'm going to take more notice of the PAPI lights for finals, because it looks like the ILS is a long way out. Now we've got, I think, 2 reds and 2 whites directly in front of us, so we're broadly on track. I'm going to ignore the ILS from now on and just use the PAPI lights. We're getting a bit slow.
Airspeed low. Airspeed low.
I'm just increasing thrust.
Slope.
So we're on
Glide slope.
track with the PAPI lights.
Glide slope. 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 Glide slope.
It's not going to let it go, is he? Gone a little bit low on the PAPI lights, so I'm just raising the nose gently. It will work out in the end.
100.
So now it's saying we're high.
50. 30. 20.
And we're down. Okay, so we can go to reverses. And we can extend the spoilers. We're looking to get down to about 80 knots on reverses, and then we cancel them and we go to wheel brakes. Again, notice how long this runway is. At high altitude the runways are long. So wheel brakes. Obviously we're going to go long. Flaps can come up, spoilers can come off. Landing lights can come off. Position lights can go to solid. And we'll be off the runway soon. There's the terminals over there at Alto. But notice how long this runway was, and that's on purpose. Because yeah, in the thin air, big jets need a long time, not only to come in, but to slow down. Because they are coming in typically faster. Also for takeoff, you know, a takeoff at high altitudes is a lot faster than normal. So you need longer to accelerate. So I think that was a really good example. It didn't go smoothly, and you shouldn't expect it to go smoothly at high altitude. It's going to be interesting actually to have a quick look over here and see what that gauge is. This gauge is still where we put it. If we go back to auto, it's building its pressure back up, look. So it was worth seeing that. It seems to be a slight uphill slope here, so I'm just opening the throttles to taxi off the runway. We'll make our way around to the terminal. Be interesting to see if anybody has a payware version of El Alto, because it's a great place to fly into just for the exercise of doing a high altitude approach. Look at the hill. It's incredible, isn't it? So on the taxi in, we can obviously go and turn the APU back on. So you'll see the needle jump around there. Whoa. And these gates are on the hillside. I can't imagine this is accurate. Although you never know, do you? Let's go for the second gate, because there's a little aeroplane in the halfway through the tarmac on the first gate. Yeah, it hasn't got proper alignment markers, has it? It's not the most accurate rendition in the world of an airport. So we will hold it on the toe brakes. Pull the parking brake on if it will let us. There we go. Release the toe brakes, and as the APU come up to speed, it should have by now, it's just falling back to 4. There we go. So engage the APU. So we're using the APU now, so we can shut the engines down. Obviously there's a whole shutdown sequence we can go through. But yeah, hopefully that was interesting to you to see some of the considerations for landing at a high altitude airfield. I actually like, doing these unusual things, because sometimes they require a little bit of research. We can go and turn off some of those extra lights, so the taxi light can come off now. But yeah, it's just great fun, isn't it? Right. So there we go. So that was a flight today from, if we pull up the flight information, Chacalluta over to El Alto. Right, I'm going to leave it there. Hopefully you enjoyed that, and I'll see you again soon.